Hey there, Nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and welcome to Cheap Shots, the ultimate series for miniatures wargamers who want stunning tabletop quality miniatures without breaking the bank. In this series, we'll show you how to save money on your miniatures painting hobby by using affordable craft paints, budget-friendly tools, and clever techniques. So whether you're a beginner or a seasoned hobbyist, you'll learn how to achieve incredible results without the premium price tag. And on today's video, we're going to show you guys how to paint up a squad of Myrmourn Banshees for your games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And by following the tips and techniques and materials that we suggest in this video, we'll help you save a bunch of money by having you only spend $29.45 in order to paint up this squad, as opposed to Citadel as well as Army Painter requiring $147.60. In the end, we're going to save you $118.15 to create this beautiful squad of Myrmourn Banshees. As you guys can see in the background image, this is what the end result will look like. So with that being said, let's go on and talk about these guys and how to paint them up cheaply and quickly. So the very first thing you have to do, of course, is to assemble your miniatures. Now, luckily, the Myrmourn Banshees, at least the ones that I purchased anyways, were push-fit construction. So because of that, they're very easy to assemble, and I just love the way that these characters look. They're so thematic. They got these beautiful bases with gravestones and wrought iron fencing, as well as ruins and vines, and they look absolutely stunning. Just to give you guys some fair warning, I'm not actually planning on using these Myrmourn Banshees for games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. I'm actually planning on using them as members of an undead warband for games of Mordheim. So if you're wondering why I made some of the choices I made in this video, that's specifically why. So once you actually have your miniatures assembled, the first thing I do, of course, is to prime your miniatures. And priming is a very important step for miniature painting because what it does, it allows your acrylic paints to adhere to the surface of your miniature. Unfortunately, if you were to paint your miniature with bare plastic with your paints, the slightest bit of friction would cause it to rub right off, ruining the overall finish of your miniature. So it's best to use priming in order to solve that. Now, traditionally, when it comes to primers, the lighter the primer, the more vibrant the paint scheme you plan on putting on your miniature. And since we're going to be doing a lot of glazing on these miniatures to create this kind of ethereal effect, we're going to paint these guys up in some flat white primer from Rust-Oleum. I get this at my local Walmart, and we're ready to move on to our very first set of glazing. So as I mentioned before, in order to get that ethereal look on these miniatures, we're going to use glazing. And what glazing requires you to do is to mix your paints with some water to about a 50-50 consistency. What you want to do is you want to change out your paint into basically a wash. Now what this water is going to do, of course, it's going to thin out the pigment of your paint. It's going to act like a wash, so it's going to be very pale, the color scheme that you put on these miniatures. That's important for us because when we do an ethereal paint job, that white undercoat is going to bleed through the successful layers of glazing, and it's going to create that kind of glowing effect that we're looking for on these miniatures. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some Dutch Aqua by Folk Art. I'm going to mix this a 50-50 mixture with water. I'm going to glaze this, adding like a wash all over the surface of the miniature. Now, I will warn you guys, glazing is a very time-consuming process because for every layer of glazing that you put in your miniature, you have to wait for it to completely dry before you move on to the next step. So I suggest that either you work on several other projects or find something else to work on while you're waiting for this stuff to dry. In this situation, I put 3 layers of glazing directly on top of the miniatures. And as you can see, we have this kind of cool, kind of turquoise kind of glowing effect going on with these miniatures. So to add some visual interest to these miniatures, we're going to also do another set of glazing, this time using pale blue by bright blue by Apple Barrel Paint in order to achieve this effect as well. And we're going to put this directly onto the dresses of the Myrmourn Banshees. It looks like what these Banshees are wearing, looks like they have these giant veils over their heads, and they are wearing these dresses with these like silver, like this golden colored chest armor that they're wearing. So for the gowns that they're wearing, to kind of create that contrasting in color, we're going to put 3 layers of glazing with that bright blue directly onto their dresses. And of course, once again, you got to wait for each layer of paint to dry before you add the next layer of glazing. And now that we're done with our glazing, the next thing we got to do now is to unify these color schemes, and we're going to do a light dry brush with some Folk Art's Pale Gray. Now, dry brushing, of course, is a very important step in miniatures painting because what it does, it creates the illusion of depth on your miniatures. When you dry brush your miniatures, the pigments adhere to the raised surface in your miniatures while leaving that darker color in the recesses. Now, when it comes to dry brushing, it's always best to start off with a very light dusting of your dry brushing because it's very easy to add more layers of dry brushing, but you can't really go back unless, of course, you start from scratch all over again. And we're just going to do a very light dry brushing all over the miniature that we did with the glazing that we did at this point. The glazing at this point, the dry brushing, what it'll do is it'll unify the color schemes really quickly by having them kind of blend in with the rest of the color schemes that we have on the glazing that we did before. Now, if you notice, these miniatures do have a chalky appearance, but don't stress out though, that is whole part of the process. And this is going to sound kind of weird to say this, but actually we're pretty much done with the miniatures for the most part. All we got to do now is start working on the bases as well as some finer details. So I decided to work on the bases first. I did pavement paint by Apple Paint directly onto the bases. The bases have a lot of texturing on these miniatures, so I didn't want to overload the paint onto the bases. That way those details will be there. So I decided to do a single layer of pavement paint on by Apple Paint. Now if you'll notice, you can see a lot of the white undercoat coming through on that. That's perfectly fine because we're going to dry brush these with pale gray anyways. So we're just going to add to the overall dry brushing effect on these miniatures and bring out a lot of those details. And in fact, that's exactly what I did. I just dry brushed the bases real quick with some pale gray by Folk Art. As you can see, it brings a lot of those details we couldn't see before. Things like the texturing on the bases, individual vines, as well as blossoms. We see pieces of wood, as well as stone and masonry. All kinds of details that we really couldn't see before. And speaking of those details, the next thing we're going to do, of course, is to paint all the wood elements that are on these miniatures. So they have a lot of tree roots as well as a lot of tree, tree stumps that are on these miniatures as well. So bring out those details. We're going to paint those wood elements in 2 thin layers of burnt umber by Apple Paint. It's a nice, rich, dark brown color, and we're just going to base coat all those details that we did earlier in burnt umber. And to add a little bit more detail to the wood that we painted earlier, we're going to dry brush it real quick with some Territorial Beige by Apple Paint as well, so that way you can bring out like the individual grains of the wood as well as this texturing as well. The next detail we're going to work on real fast are on the bone elements on these miniatures as well. There's several pieces of bone on it, like the skulls on the bases as well as the jaw bones of some of these Banshees. And to pick out that detail, we're going to put 2 thin layers of khaki paint by Apple Paint. We just put 2 thin layers on the bone elements and ready to move on to our next detail. And that next detail are all the blossoms on these miniatures as well. If you'll notice, there's a couple of flowering blossoms on the bases, and we're going to pick that on 2 thin layers of magenta, bright magenta by Apple Paint. The reason why is because that pink color will actually contrast nicely with all the blues that we have in these miniatures, as well as some of the metallic elements that we'll add on later on as well. And to add just a little bit more detail to those blossoms, we're going to dry brush them real quick with some Cameo Pink by Apple Paint, so that we can see the individual blossoms of the flowers, and at the same time add a little bit of highlighting of color to these miniatures as well. And the very last detail we're going to add to our Banshees are the metallic elements. And there's not very many metallic elements on these miniatures, but we do want to make sure that we're careful so that way our metallic elements don't bleed directly into the ethereal paint that we did earlier. So the elements we're going to primarily use are Deca Arts Emperor's Gold. We're going to use this for all the gold elements on these Banshees, things like their chest armors and breastplates they're wearing, as well as the handles of their daggers. And then we're also going to pick out some of the finer metal details in silver. We're going to pick that in Folk Arts Gunmetal Gray as well. So those details, example, are the blades of the daggers they're carrying, as well as some of the jewelry they're carrying, as well as some of the wrought iron fencing that's around them as well in their bases. And with that, we're ready to move on to an oil wash. However, though, we're going to be very selective with our oil wash this time around. And the reason why is because we want to maintain that ethereal glowing effect that these miniatures have as well. So the only place we're going to be adding this oil wash to is onto the metallic elements, as well as the bone elements on the Banshees, as well as primarily their bases. But we're going to leave the blues and the teals that we did earlier alone, so that way it kind of glows. Now, the oil washing step is an important step because what it does is that it creates additional layers of detail. The oil wash does a couple of things. The first thing that it does, of course, is it goes directly into the recesses of the miniatures and brings out those details we couldn't see before, like the texturing on the bases, for example, the gaps between the armor panels that they're wearing, all those kind of details. The second thing it also does, too, is it also smooths out the transition between our dry brushing as well as our base coating. As you can see, the chalky appearance on the base is now completely gone because that oil wash has smoothed out those transitions. And the last thing the oil wash also does, too, is it also darkens down the value of our colors as well, to make it a little bit more gritty and grimdark as well. And that's the reason why we don't add the oil wash directly to the ethereal parts, because we want to remain that to be bright as well as glowing. Now, for this part, of course, it's going to take about 24 hours for the stuff to dry and cure because there is polyurethane mixed with it. So my suggestion to you is to use this as the very last step of your painting process. You can stop where you end up with the oil wash and return back to the very next day. You can pick up where you left off. So 24 hours have passed as I put that oil wash directly onto the bases as well as the finer details. And the very last detail we're going to pick real quick is the rim of the bases. In this case, I use English Ivy Green by Apple Paint. It's a nice dark olive drab color that I use for all the undead miniatures in the studio's collection. I just put 2 thin layers around the base, and then we're ready to go. Now this next step, of course, is completely optional. I decided to do a matte varnish spray all over my miniatures, and the reason why is because that polyurethane in the oil wash, of course, will have a high gloss sheen when it's finished. So because I just hit it with some Krylon matte varnish spray real quick to mute down that varnish, and because I like a matte finish on my miniatures. If you do like that candy coated look, you can of course skip this step. And just like that, our miniatures are now completed. So if you want to achieve the exact same effects we did, but using Citadel as well as Armored Painter and paints instead, this is what you'll need to purchase from those companies. You'll need to buy a can of Corax White Spray for $24, as well as the colors Vulcan Green, Fulgrim Pink, Teclis Blue, Screamer Pink, Ulthuan Gray, Morghast Bone, Baylor Brown, and Eshin Gray, and all those colors are going to cost you $4.55 a piece. You'll also need to buy the colors Leadbelcher, Wildwood, Aethermatic Blue, as well as Retributor Armor, and those are going to cost $7.80 for those colors. You'll need to buy a can of Armored Painter Strong Tone for $32 for the oil wash, as well as a can of Munitorium Varnish for $24 if you want to have that matte varnish finish. Assuming that you're purchasing everything for the very first time from this list, you're talking about a grand total investment of $147.60 or paint up your Myrmourn Banshees the same way we did, but using those name brand paints instead. Our cheapskate total only cost us $29.45, and when you subtract the two, you end up with a grand total savings of $118.15. So there you guys go. If you're looking for a way to save money on the miniatures wargaming hobby, may I suggest using cheaper craft paints in order to paint up your miniatures. You get similar results at a fraction of the price, at the same time they look absolutely stunning if you do it correctly on your miniatures. So there you guys have it. That's good for this video. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. I am Commander Cheapskate. I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace out and stay classy.